Welcome to the Birth of a Mama podcast, a place where mothers can share their real life stories because every experience is real, every experience is valid. So let's talk about it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Birth of a Mama podcast. Today I have Chelsea Morris on the show. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Let's have you start off by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and your family.
Okay. Well, my name's Chelsea, and I am married to Levi Morris, and he's an attorney locally in our community. And we have one son named Warren, who is 2.5. He'll be 3 at the end of March, and we're due with our second baby in a couple weeks. And we've got a couple of Yorkie pups that keep us all busy. So I think that's a brief synopsis of our life.
Yes, sounds like, especially being so pregnant, it sounds like a very busy life.
Yes, yeah. We're hanging in there right now. So,
and where are you guys?
Oh, yeah, that's important. We are in Kansas, in the middle of Kansas. So, in a community called Great Bend, but it's kind of right in the middle of the state. So,
nice, lovely.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start with having you describe the transition into motherhood in 3 words. I know this can be challenging, but I love to see where people's brains go with this one.
Sure. No, it is challenging. I was thinking about it and somewhat prepared for today, having listened to some of your other podcasts and words that resonated with me with them. But I think my own words are lonely and overwhelming, but also incredible. I don't want to scare anybody away from motherhood with those words, but it for me has provided kind of an environment that lent to loneliness and overwhelm, but equally incredible and beautiful. So,
yeah, very well put. I resonate with that completely. Let's start with you sharing how was your first pregnancy, and then if you want to touch on your current pregnancy as well, and kind of compare the two, you can do that. And if you prepared for postpartum at all with your first one, and then if you prepared with this one as well, and how those were maybe different.
Sure. My pregnancy with Warren was unremarkable, I can say, in like the best way. Like no complications. It was, I have a rare stomach disorder. And so I was concerned, honestly, would I even be able to eat solid food during pregnancy? And I was told that, it could go either of 2 ways. It could make my body worse, or it could make it better. And pregnancy kind of made it all better, as if I had no issues. And that was a beautiful thing. So, so I felt a lot of freedom with that pregnancy, being able to eat. I couldn't eat avocados normally, or salads, or a lot of I love vegetables. And this was a life-altering change for me when this diagnosis came about, and I was unable to tolerate solid foods for a while. So pregnancy was a really kind of up in the air. Could we tolerate it? Would we make it? And we did. And flying colors. His pregnancy, like I said, was very uneventful. That is until the end, and he did not want to leave my body. So that was the biggest eventful part of it. We had prepared for delivery by following the Bradley method. I had accompanied my sister through all 3 of her pregnancies and been in the delivery room with her. She and her husband did the Bradley method, and that's something I definitely knew I wanted to do and have a natural birth. But it was not the case for us. Our son was very late, which is totally common for first timers, but he was also very big. So our OB didn't want to wait very, very much longer, and we tried a soft induction that didn't work, and ended up having to do a formal induction in a hospital that as a lot of people read inductions lead to C-sections, and that's what we ended with. And that was not part of my birth plan or birth journey that I had planned for. And we had a doula that was going to accompany us as well. Warren's pregnancy was in the height of the pandemic, so we were limited with my husband and myself in the delivery room outside of a doula. Otherwise, my sister would have been there with us, which I think would have been wonderful. But I was happy to at least have somebody, and our doula was amazing. But the whole experience, having to navigate that when things weren't exactly going to plan at that point, and having I ultimately made the call for the C-section because we had been at a labor stall for over 5 hours. And for me, I wanted to be awake during delivery. And my fear was if we waited longer, it would potentially end in an emergency C-section where I might not be awake to be present for the birth of my child. So reluctantly and tearfully, we made the decision to follow through with the C-section. And in the end, my son was born, and that's all that matters. He is here, he is healthy. I was healthy. We were okay. It was not what I had envisioned or planned for, but it's taken me a couple years to talk about it so calmly, I can say. It definitely left kind of a pit in my stomach, as it wasn't the type of birth that I had wanted or planned for. But kind of moving into that postpartum, I had prepared a lot of meals, and during pregnancy also did workouts and tried to focus on health before a delivery, because it is a big moment. It is not something you go into untrained. And so using birthing balls and stretching and yoga and walking, doing the mile circuit and spinning babies, and I think there might be another one called Three Sisters or something like that, where I did a lot of inversions just to prepare. Again, I felt like I did a lot of work going into birth, and having been present for my sister's births, it was an experience where I felt while I've never experienced it myself, I had seen it fully carried out kind of the way I envisioned doing it myself. But during that later part in pregnancy, trying to prepare for postpartum, I prepared meals and had some of our favorite meals readily available. My husband's not a cook. I do the bulk of the cooking for our family. So I knew if we wanted to eat and not be super stressed, having some meals available to us would be important. And again, it was the height of the pandemic, so people weren't doing, meal drop-offs and all sorts of stuff like that. It was a different time. So this pregnancy has been largely different in that way. But our son had sensitivities to onion and garlic. And so all of the meals that I had prepared for us were unable to be eaten. And it was not, I mean, it's funny now. It was not funny in the moment. No. So it felt very devastating, as I had spent so much time creating this environment for us, planning and organizing. I'm very type A in some areas of my life, and in others it's people look at me are you sure you're type A? So I like to have everything organized as much as I can, and I thought I had prepared, and I did, but I was not prepared for our son to have some of the digestive issues that he did, or sensitivities really. And we found a few weeks into him being here that a very bland diet is what was going to get us through. And I exclusively breastfed him actually up until June of this year. And that was not my initial plan. It just kind of happened. And I can say breastfeeding journey is a whole nother topic. And I remember in the first couple weeks and months feeling there's no way I'm going to make it. I had a goal of a year in my head. I just wanted to make it to a year. That's a lot of my thought process about what to do and what not to do was based on my sister. She's a few years older. she's always kind of charged the way and gave a beautiful example of what to do and how to raise babies. And so in my mind, I thought this was my milestone. I wanted to make it to a year. And I distinctively remember between 4 and 6 weeks bawling, thinking there's just no way. It's not that breastfeeding was uncomfortable, but it was just, and I know some women experience that, but I was not having any discomfort. It was just the challenge and the isolation, I think. I don't know that all women feel isolation in breastfeeding, but I felt lonely. The middle of the night feedings were really hard. I felt very resentful of my husband because he's over there sleeping so soundly, and I'm the one getting up having to feed our child because I'm the only one that can. And not only did we exclusively breastfeed, but our son had extreme bottle refusal. So when I thought we could add in bottle feeding and give myself a little bit of a break and I would pump, that didn't work either. And so it just felt that an immense, I think, pressure and an immense feeling of isolation and loneliness because I was forging ahead on my own. As much as my husband wanted to help, there really wasn't much he could do. And so he, would step in and help with providing breakfast for me and various stuff like that. But even in those moments of just you're out and about, when you try to venture out, I don't know, not everybody is super confident with a newborn, and some people are, and they take them everywhere early on, but we did not. Again, part of that was the pandemic, but we felt it was important to stay close to home and nourish ourselves because along with the digestive issues we were experiencing with our son, it was probably hand in hand. He was very colicky, and in the first 2 weeks of birth or after birth for him, I had slept a collective 2 hours. It was probably the most brutal thing I've ever experienced. The hospital was I wanted to get out. Typically C-sections, you stay between 2 days is the minimum, 5 days is normal. We left the second we could qualify, and he was born at midnight almost on a Wednesday, and we left Friday afternoon. Like, they let us out technically a little bit early, but I had limited sleep in the hospital. They wouldn't leave me alone, and they would constantly tell me, "Oh, you need a rest." But then 5 minutes later, somebody else would walk in the door, and that was frustrating. So that kind of started it and made me think, I just need to get home. I need to get home and be in my own environment. This isn't working for me. It's not working for us. I need to get home. And then we had our infant who would cry all night long from like 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. And my husband and I are just staring at each other, bleary-eyed. I'm crying off and on because this is not what I had envisioned. My husband, I think, he's an only child and so he doesn't have siblings who had kids. His friends had kids 10 years ago. He's an older dad, and it was just very eye-opening for us because I know babies cry. I know newborn phase is hard, but this was a whole different level of hard that like knocked us to our knees and just, left us feeling helpless. And, but we found 4 a.m. baths were kind of the soother for him. And then that bland diet kind of kicked in, and it was like, oh, once I ate something that was very bland, it was just like things were better. They didn't go away, but they were better. And so it just kind of led us down this path of less flavor, less seasoning for me, bland diet, warm baths, soothing music, kind of middle of the night sort of thing, and got us to a somewhat comfortable place by about 6 weeks old, and he slept through the night for the first time. And I can tell you, both my husband and I woke up, we were terrified that he died, honestly, because he didn't make a peep, and we thought maybe he did, and we just slept through it because we were so tired. But we had tried a Merlin suit. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or some of your listeners might be, but it's like very much like this Michelin man suit, and we had a very, very chunky baby, so he definitely looked like a Michelin man baby just laying there in his crib. But he slept through the night, and it was like the most beautiful thing. And then that lasted for several months until he started teething. And then it's just been kind of the up and down roller coaster of teething and sleep regressions and development and everything every child normally does. So that was not very brief, but that was kind of a pregnancy postpartum journey for me in the early days. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just sitting here shaking my head because I'm like, I'm just relating to so many things that you're sharing because they were also my experience, and just the level of exhaustion and like how coveted sleep is and how little of it that you're getting and how much you think you might have prepared to be a mom, and then you're in it and you're realizing all these things come up that you could never have prepared for, like food, intolerances. Like, you can't guess those things, right? You just don't know those things until you're going through it. So it's just, there's a level of preparation that's so important and useful when it comes to like nourishing yourself and having meals and things like that. But then in your case, it's like foods you ended up not even being able to eat. So this is just such a good example of how much motherhood like really throws you for a loop. Like, you just cannot imagine or truly know what it will be like, even if you have a million real life examples, that you've seen and experienced that are outside of yourself. You just really can't know until you are in it. And it is so much more and harder than you could imagine. And it's so beautiful too, right? Like, it's not all bad and hard and tough, but it's kind of like, the things worth having in life are never easy, right? Like, it's the epitome of that, I would say, for
absolutely
in all of life. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of that, I like, yes, I prepared for myself, but I thought I had babysat and nannied over the years. Like, I had been around kids, I had been around babies, and I was not it wasn't lost on me that having a baby would be challenging, but just again, to the degree of challenge that came with it was, you just don't know until you're really in it. And but other things that I did that was part of kind of my journey over the last like 15 plus years of just health and wellness for myself, included chiropractor care. And that's one thing we started very early with our son. I mean, he was maybe a week old. He was not 2 weeks old when we took him in for his first adjustment, because again, with the extreme colic, the sensitivities, all sorts of stuff, we weren't sure. Maybe, I mean, birth is traumatic. Even though he came via C-section, birth is still traumatic. And he was such a large baby that my OB said she had to re-grip him 3 times to pull him out, and his shoulder honestly still pops today. And it's been that way since birth. And it makes me, did we stretch a ligament? Did we do something? But regardless of how your baby arrives, birth is traumatic. And so for me, taking him into a chiropractor was step one for us. And then, kind of following that same journey, I really think that's what lent us to make it to 2.5 years for him before he had his first ear infection, of just, not weekly, not monthly, but regular reoccurring chiropractor visits, just to, keep him in line, because babies fall, toddlers fall, they do all sorts of stuff. They're active, and just like adults need a tune-up, kids need to kind of, at least in my opinion, they need that just to maintain a homeostasis sort of thing, So we added that in very early, and as well as probiotics and stuff like that. But yeah, I really think, like, you don't know until you're in it, and there was no way for us to know or prepare for his digestive sensitivities, and so I think once you're in those moments, it's just really trying to find what works best for your child. But in that same vein, like, continue to advocate for your kid. Everybody's different, and I can tell you how many different doctors we've seen for him for various things. And it's just one of those things that you have to keep advocating along the way. You know your child best. These providers only know what they know, and they don't sleep with your kid. They don't see them 24/7. So I think one thing I definitely want to make sure I get across today is just continue to advocate for your kiddo. And we can talk about that more a little bit later too. I think just kind of the journey we've been on with him and health and tongue ties and ENTs and that stuff. But I started raising questions when he was, maybe 3 months old, maybe earlier. And we're just now at 2.5, almost 3, finding providers that can see what I've been talking about for the last 2.5 years. So I don't want to segue us there yet if that's not what we're ready for, but I think what
I think you shared a good overview, I feel like, of like all of it, like from pregnancy to postpartum. So we can either skip ahead and we can go into detail on like after baby's here and those early days with your son, into like, or if you want to go into more detail with anything prior, like with pregnancy or birth, we can do that too. So it's kind of up to you, because I feel like you gave a good overview of having a C-section and the experience with wanting to go home in the hospital and all of that, which I can very much, I didn't have a C-section, but I can very much relate to being like, okay, I just want to be home and be comfortable. And hopefully try to get like a little bit of sleep, because I was in the same boat as you, where I had maybe a couple hours of sleep in like 48 hours. So it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, for sure, hands down. Just with that level of sheer exhaustion on top of having to now do 20 new things, all the time around the clock. It's crazy that, we are able to do that and we survive. And that's really what it is. It's like, it's survival. I when I was listening to you say you had your 4 a.m. baths and your bland food and your this and I'm just thinking, like we go into survival mode, and we just do what we have to do to keep going, and we have to take it like we're day by day, pretty much. It's a beautiful, chaotic thing that we go through. And I love that you mentioned it being traumatic. I think you were referring to like the child being born, but I'm of the perspective that birth is traumatic, period. Like for mother, for child, like it is. And I had never had that perspective before, before having my own child. I would only consider it to be traumatic if something devastating happened, or, something, out of your control that was harmful to you in a way that was emotional or physical or something. Like that was how it had to be defined. But I don't think that that's the case. I think that it's just such an intense experience that you go through, and it physically and metaphorically like rips you open and, exposes parts of you that you didn't even know that you had in you. So
Absolutely.
I think it's just baseline traumatic. So not that I like that it's traumatic, but I think it's good to acknowledge that and to kind of talk about that aspect of it and have that perspective be brought to attention. So So was there anything else you wanted to share about your birth experience, or do we want to go into more postpartum stuff?
We could talk more about the birth experience too. I ended up with a epidural. I feel like I could dive in with more information there, but I don't know if it's going to be helpful or necessary. But
I know it could really be a whole episode to talk about birth itself, right? So that's why I was like, breathe. I always try to tell people, breathe explanation, but it's hard because there's so many details.
It is hard.
Birth.
Yeah.
Well, we could jump into postpartum then if you want. If you want to talk about kind of leaving the hospital and getting home, and you can kind of just chronologically, because I know those first couple of weeks are usually really hard with your emotions and your hormones and just figuring out a routine with this new little person. So let's start with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another thing kind of about our story that's, I don't think everybody delivers 2 hours away from where they live. But as I mentioned earlier, I live in the middle of Kansas, and we have a hospital here. Part of me cringes because I hate it, or it's disheartening to me when people go out of their way to use people out of town for services that you can get in our town. I made the transition about 7 years ago due to like a cervical cancer scare, and just kept with that specialist office in Wichita for my OB office, and decided to deliver there. And so when we were leaving the hospital, we had a 2-hour drive home with a newborn, and we weren't sure what that was going to look like. We didn't know if we honestly, my husband and I thought we were going to have to pull over and do nurse on the side of the road sort of situation. But he slept the entire way home, which was beautiful. We were both shocked by it. And it probably worked out that way a little bit because he was so big. He had some stores on him already. So he came out looking like probably, he did not look like a newborn. I'll just say that. So he was almost 10 pounds at birth and did not look like the newborn that you typically see or expect. And so, but those first couple weeks at home, kind of as I shared, it kind of really rocked our world in the sense of just the sleep deprivation was not what we were anticipating, at least to that degree. Figuring out the food issues, figuring out the new schedule, and God bless my husband. Like, I don't want this to sound terrible, but he really took to heart the sleep when baby sleeps quote that a lot of people hear and you share. Everybody's words of advice was always just make sure you sleep when the baby sleeps. And he took that to heart, and good for him. But as the new mom who had delivered our baby, and struggled with anxiety during pregnancy, we had a miscarriage before we got pregnant with Warren, and I struggled with that anxiety during that pregnancy, and even this one as well. But then I transitioned. That anxiety for me didn't go away just having the baby out and visible. I thought it would, but then it transitioned into, worrying about, your worry changes, worrying about SIDS and other things that can happen. And I think, again, part of that is my own personal experience. I have not lost a baby to SIDS, but we have good friends that did over 10 years ago. And we also, in the same town, right across the street from my mom. So these people had a baby and it died. I mean, their child was 2 weeks younger than our son, and there's just gut-wrenching moments that come through that, like, they resonate, you identify with, and in the worst ways you wish you wouldn't. But I think all of these are worries that parents experience. But because of our personal experiences, that led to, I think, greater anxiety for me. And I had been seeing a therapist before during pregnancy and continue to see one postpartum. And I'm still seeing that person today. I think that it's great to be able to talk to somebody about that, or be able to just work through it and identify triggers or identify thoughts, or, your hormones are changing so much. It's like a complete hormone dump in your body when you deliver a baby, and your body's just adjusting, and it can take a long time to adjust and to feel like yourself again in many ways, not just hormonally, but physically, all of that. And so you're literally navigating so much when you come home from the hospital with a newborn. It's not just, oh, it's time to feed the baby and you grab formula, or you nurse your baby, or you've pumped milk so you warm it up. It's so much wrapped into this world that you have created this being, and it's your responsibility. And you were really good at taking care of yourself. Maybe you weren't. I know self-care is not a strong suit for everybody, but you took care of yourself and you knew how to do that. But now you and your spouse, or maybe it's just you, are now caring for this new life, and it 100% depends on you. Babies can't do anything for themselves, as we know. And that's kind of this beautiful transition that is also difficult to watch as you watch your children get older. It's lovely to see them become more independent. It is also heartbreaking to see them become more independent, because they once relied on you for everything. And my sister and I have talked, and it's just as you come around to, mentally and physically being on board with the physical and emotional needs of motherhood, they change. and they adjust. And those needs change and the demands change. And it's a forever evolution of yourself, your mind and body, physically and emotionally. And that's just straight up hard. So, but those first few weeks and months were really challenging for us. And as I mentioned earlier, that Merlin sleep suit was a dream for us. We that I can't talk or speak more highly of it. We also watched Taking Care of Babies, like newborn sleep, because some of our friends knew how much we were struggling, and they said, "Oh, this worked so well for us," and we adopted her principles and they helped, yes, but also her videos were so calming because she spoke so softly and like nurturing. And I think that is part of the whole thing to get you on board, because I think she just knows how vulnerable you are and how kind of split open you are emotionally and physically from birth, and the complete 180 adjustment of bringing home a baby and adjusting to life with that baby. It puts you in this, I don't know, almost state of analysis paralysis. That's where I found myself, of just overanalyzing, wanting to do things perfectly, knowing I'm making mistakes, but wanting and trying to come across as well informed as possible, and just don't break the baby. I think that probably went through my head so many times, comically so, yes, but also just in my head it was just, don't break the baby. And I mean, babies are resilient, they really are, but that was a fear of mine, and I think just as you move through that postpartum journey in the first few weeks and months, you begin to find that normal, you begin to find your rhythm, but it takes a long time for that to happen for yourself and your spouse. What it's like to parent together, you cohabitated, but you're now co-parenting. Even though they're infants, you're learning to share. And I think that, again, is one thing I struggled with, was kind of going back to my husband sleeping when the baby sleeps. I felt very alone because I wasn't sleeping at night, and then he was napping during the day when our baby would sleep. But I felt desperately that somebody needed to be awake for the baby, because I was so nervous about many, many things, and I couldn't sleep if I knew that he was sleeping. And so that's one thing we've talked about, and hopefully we're preparing much better for this time around. But I'm also prioritizing sleep for myself, whereas it wasn't. I mean, the baby takes so much of your capacity as a new mom, but also I did not take care of myself. And that was not helpful for our marriage or our relationship, or caring for a newborn when you're not caring for yourself. And so I think just finding that balance and being open to having those conversations with your spouse and sharing where you're struggling. I feel like that's one of the things I don't have a hard time with, is telling my husband, hey, I'm struggling here. What I do have a hard time with is coming up with a solution. And so rather than trying to do that independently, I, somewhere through the mess of it all, have decided that it's better to involve him in that. He's part of that solution. So let's have that conversation together. It doesn't have to be me making up different ideas that how this is going to play out. If I'm struggling with something, all I need to do is bring it to him. And if I'm struggling with, how do I navigate this with our son? How do I navigate this with, some of my biggest struggles with being a working mom. I work part-time and finding balance in that. And I didn't like what he had to say. He's like, you need to work less. And I didn't like that. But it took me a while to come on board with that. And then when he did, I was just like, oh, I should have done that sooner. Like, I feel so much better. I love this arrangement. And that was like right as we found out we were pregnant, having a second. I was like, oh, I really loved the Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons that I've scheduled to work. And now I don't know how I'm going to do that with two. I think that's going to look different. But it took me a while to come on board with what he was saying. And it's largely because I am more of a, I don't want to say overachiever, but I'm more of a productivity oriented person. I like to do things and see results and be proactive and just working on something. And it was a hard adjustment for me into motherhood of, while I'm taking care of an infant, there's a lot of work that goes into that. It's different than the work I was doing. It's different than the work I do now with our son. And that's an adjustment. And I think just giving yourself time and space to navigate that and understanding and realizing that it's okay if you need to step back. That's what worked for me. It might not work for everybody, but I tried to, probably when our son was about 7 months old, we bought another commercial building. We have one in our town that I've been renovating for a while. And then I'm a photographer, and my childhood photographer was selling his studio, and we decided to buy it. And then I decided to renovate it, and all while having a child who wasn't a year old yet, which that was a bad idea. I don't recommend it. So things that I've learned, don't do what I did. That's one thing we joke about now. That's one thing we won't be doing when this baby is, 7, 8 months, even a year or two. We're not going to buy another property and renovate it. We're going to sit, and it's okay if where we're at doesn't look like where we want to be. This is where we're at, and that's okay. And I think for us, and particularly me, being the achieving person and having that drive that I do, that's hard for me to get on board with. But again, I think I constantly remind myself and see reminders on Instagram and other places that the most important work you do is the work inside your home. And that's in reference to your kids. And I really value that and resonate with that this is my job. I'm raising a child that will be an adult someday, and I want them to be a productive part of society. I want them to be a kind, loving, caring human being. How do I do that? Those are my biggest worries now. And the conversations my husband and I have now, like, how did your parents raise you? You turned out well. Like, I don't know what I'm doing raising a boy. I'm not a boy. What do we do? How do you have these conversations? He's like, Chelsea, we don't need to have these conversations just yet. Like, he's 2, not 13. And I'm just kind of, that's the planner in me, and wanting to have it figured out of how we can kind of come alongside and just be those bumpers. It's almost like you're bowling, and it's the bumper bowling alley of just like kids pinball, I think. And it's parents' jobs to continue to be the bumpers that guide them along the way. And I feel an immense honor, but also deep pressure in that, and wanting to raise a good human, not just raise a child and keep them alive, but I want to raise a well-rounded person that's going to be kind and generous and do well with life. And that's, I think, again, the thoughts of motherhood, the thoughts of child rearing, and just it's an evolution through the years. And as you come on board with one thing, the pieces change, and you have to navigate that and figure out the new plan. I feel like I'm kind of rambling a little bit now.
No, I'm again just sitting here nodding because I'm like agreeing with so much in my head. I find that, like, yeah, it's like, how do we raise them in a way, that we want them to be raised? And I think it starts with, are we, as mothers, like, we also need to be mothered. So like, how are, like, what is our capacity? Where is our capacity at to be able to then be a good mother so that they can be raised in that way, right? Because that takes time and energy and thought. And when you were talking about, the work it takes to have a baby and have a child and raise that child and take care of that child, compared to the work it takes when you're, in a career, it's different. It's still work, but it's so different. And that made me think of the identity shift that you go through once you have a baby and become a mom, and how massive that is, and how it can really kind of expose some things that you might not have ever thought about before or been exposed to. And it kind of makes you think about what you really want out of life and reprioritize things. And it can be helpful to take a step back and, think about, is the work I'm doing in my career even what I really want to be doing? And how do I want my life to look, because you're also, demonstrating that to your children, and they
Yeah.
absorb so much
Mm-hmm.
starting way younger than you'd even think. They are watching everything that you do and learning, and even though, you know, we think, oh, they're so little, like they're not going to remember this, like the first 1,000 days or whatever, right, is supposed to be the most impactful, like most important time of their lives, and it's like the time that's the most challenging probably in parenthood, because you know, you are just like to
Yeah.
your limits with everything,
Mm-hmm.
and really just trying to figure everything out, and half the time we're just winging it because we don't really know what we're doing, and everyone's lying and
Yeah.
keeping it all
Yeah.
together on the outside, and freaking
Oh,
out on the
yeah.
inside, you know. And it's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's why I want to come here and have this platform to share about the truth about what
Mm-hmm.
goes on behind the scenes, and how, you know, this really plays out in life, because this is the important stuff of life, you know, like these are the
Yeah.
people that are going to be our future, our children and their
Mm-hmm.
children, and it's like we're setting up a legacy, and we're leaving our mark, and we're, you know, what is the point of life beyond that, really, right? I mean, we could get
Yeah.
really philosophical if we wanted to with all of that, but like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that like really is, it just gives you a different perspective. And yeah, there's so much that goes into the conversations. I feel like we could break this out into so many topics and have full on
Yes.
like 2-hour podcast episodes on all of these
Oh, yeah.
things. And I would love to do that. If you're ever interested in doing that, I could have you back on, and we can dive into breastfeeding. We could dive into, you know, so many specific things of motherhood that
Yeah.
are huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
let's see. I'm trying to look at my questions and see if there's anything that we
Yeah.
missed. So obviously you're due very soon with your second.
Yes.
And you kind of, I feel like throughout you kind of touched on things that you're going to do differently. Like you said the sleep, you're really going to prioritize like
Mm-hmm.
taking better care of yourself and you getting more sleep. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have a specific plan for that, or how is that going to look? How will that play out?
I don't know how nights are really going to look. It's really that part I don't feel like I have much control over. It's when baby's up and wants to eat, that's what we're doing. But during the day, I've had some family members reach out and offer to come over, and like in pairs, one will play with our 2.5-year-old and the other one will hold the baby, and I can go rest. And they have already kind of helped with contributing to that. I think the other side is in the early days while my husband is taking time off too, like we are going to communicate and do a better job of taking turns of sleeping when the baby sleeps, and really kind of leaning on each other during that time, versus I think I felt immense pressure as a first time mom, and just a lot of anxiety around it, that I couldn't relax. And this isn't our first rodeo. We've done this before. I will be honest, it is a little terrifying going into it again. But we're going to be okay. And so that I really think that just communicating better with each other is going to help in the early days, and then really taking help when people offer it, and also not being afraid to ask for help when I need it, which is something I struggle with. I don't think it's unique to me. I think a lot of women in particular struggle with asking for help, and struggle when receiving help as well, even if it's offered. I think there's a lot of pressure, again, in pressure in motherhood to do it yourself. And if you need help, then something's wrong, and that's not
Yeah.
the case at all, like it truly takes a village. I was just listening to another podcast probably a week ago that they mentioned how strange it is now, and how other cultures look at the United States as we're one of the only cultures that doesn't have multi-generational living, where it's not many women in the home, many grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles are all in the home, and they all are raising the baby or babies. And we are a unique culture that has created isolation with the way our homes are structured, physically structured. And we have neighbors, but we don't know them that well. We don't interact with them the way we used to. Just society looks different. And so I think, again, being open and willing to accept help and ask for help when you need it, which are things that I'm not good at, but I'm working on, And we've already had some groups that we're part of offer to do a meal train for us. And part of me was really hesitant because of my dietary restrictions. But the other part of me is like, well, it would be nice to have food in the house. Maybe my husband and son can eat it. And if it's not something I can eat, then we'll work on that, but at least 2 of the 3 people eating solid food in our house would have something to eat, and so looking at that and knowing it's not going to be perfect, but being okay and comfortable and accepting that help that is just going to be beautiful and nice to have and could take some stress off in the early days. So and that's something we didn't have the first time. That isolation was really deep set with the COVID, and so it is a different story having a baby on the other side of COVID, on the other side of the pandemic, when people are out and about and doing things, and you're surrounded by community physically and emotionally. And before, we were, again, it was isolation on another level of isolating from other people, but then emotionally isolating as a mom, learning to navigate things for the first time. So that was
those are really good. I mean, those are great points. Yeah, the whole COVID thing. I've had a few guests on who have had, peak COVID babies, and it's motherhood is already so lonely and so isolating, and then you throw a pandemic into there, and it's like, it's a recipe for mental health issues for sure, on top of many other things, because we're not meant to do it alone, and we are doing it alone in our culture here, and it was just never meant to, having a baby, we're never supposed to do it alone. You're supposed to have all these relatives and friends around and neighbors coming together and offering help. And so I love your point of, asking for help when you need it, accepting help when it's offered. Sounds so simple, but it can be really hard, like you said, for a lot of people, especially females, especially moms, because we are led to believe that we want to be good moms and perfect moms, and good moms can do it all on their own, right? Like they're super women. They don't need anyone else. They bounce back, and they're back at the grocery store shopping, on the day after they give birth, and all these crazy unrealistic things. So asking for help, I think, is so important, because it takes a village to not only raise a child, but to support a mom so that she can raise that child. She's perfectly capable of raising her own child, but she needs support. So I love that. I love that you have something in place for your sleep and your rest, and you're prioritizing that. Like, it's just making me want to applaud. So I preach this so much. This is what I do when I work with clients who are postpartum, and setting up a plan for them so that they have support, so that they can nourish their bodies, so they can rest, so they can heal, so they can communicate with their partners. All of these things that, if you don't think about them beforehand, it's still possible to do it once you're in it, but it's a lot harder when you are in survival mode, trying to keep a newborn alive, and then thinking about all of those things afterwards. Possible, but not as easy. So I love this. I love this. I'm so excited for you to have your second and almost have this kind of hopefully redemptive experience, because with COVID, you are robbed of a lot of the things that you would expect to have with becoming a mom. So you have to kind of mourn that as a mom that went through COVID and had her first child, or any child for that matter, because it's just such a different experience. But do you want any more children? And if so, how do you know?
This is our last baby. We're excited to have this baby. I can definitely say that. The last year, our son is 2.5, and I spent half of his life also caring for my dad, who's mentally ill and physically ill as well, and I have some health issues myself, and hormone imbalance, and through all of that stress and just motherhood and being a caregiver, earlier this year, I mean, for me, I had a cutoff of when I wasn't going to try to have a baby anymore, and that's actually May of 24. And so in my mind, and my doctor honestly was very frank with me and said, if you're not, I wouldn't do it by then. If you're not pregnant, I just wouldn't do it. It's not a good idea for you with your circumstances. And so, but with all of that, that's a lot for somebody to take on. And I was being a little naive with the amount of work I was doing and caregiving. And my husband was just kind of very much like, no, we were on board to have two in the beginning. Both of us were like, yeah, we'd like to have two if it goes well. Because again, my health, we weren't sure how pregnancy number one was going to go. And if it went well, we were on board to have a second. But just with the way our lives had been looking and where we were being pulled, it just didn't look like it was going to be feasible to have a second. And earlier this year, my sister and I got our dad admitted into a facility. That was something I was really struggling with and had been attempting to do for quite a while. And we successfully did that. And within a couple of weeks of him being in that facility, I found out I was pregnant. I can just say God's timing is almost comical. It was something that I thought, given my hormone issues I was having, there was absolutely no way I was going to get pregnant. Like, one, I had to convince my husband because he was like, not with the way things look right now. There's just not enough of you to go around. And he was not wrong. Like, part of me is like, I was frustrated with him, and I don't want other moms or spouses to be angry, at that. But he also wasn't wrong, like, I was pulled way too thin to even think about adding a second baby to our family. And then kind of, seriously, if it's, all I can say is God's handiwork really came into play, and we have another miracle baby. Our first, Warren, was very much in the same boat. I was told as like an 18-year-old, if I didn't have a baby by the time I was 30, I needed a hysterectomy, and that I most likely wouldn't be able to get pregnant without in vitro or some sort of intervention. And as I mentioned, kind of my own health journey, just briefly over the last 15 years and things that I had done and to work on things myself, we got pregnant no problem with Warren, which was such a miracle in and of itself. And then this baby as well was just kind of, again, all of a sudden, my dad was not part of the equation anymore, and we miraculously are pregnant. And so it's one of those things that we have our two children. We're going to be very much done. I think this is, being a parent is a lot of work. And I initially, as a little girl, wanted to have a very big family, envisioned having 4 kids of my own and then adopting 2. So I can't imagine being a mom to 6 now. I think, oh, how naive my little heart was. But I just love the idea of community and family and holidays with lots of people. And that was the way I was going to accomplish that. But I think there's so many other ways that you can create community and family other than having, aside from having your own children. So I think 2 is going to be it for us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You're, again, I'm nodding along, and in my head, I'm just like agreeing with like everything you're saying, because we have very similar perspectives on this. And I think in some ways similar experiences too. So, I hear you. And that's such a good point, that, cause I'm the same when I, envision holidays or the dinner table, right? Like some of the kind of mindset experiences you can, or, what is the word? Exercises that you could do, for knowing how many kids you want, I guess, or that I've heard is like, well, when you imagine your dinner table, 25, 30 years from now, who's there, kind of thing. And it's like, I always imagined at least 2 kids, probably like a dog or something, maybe 3. But there's so many other ways to get those people at your table, so to speak, right? Like to build that community and to let people into your life and kind of just, I guess, spread love. Like you can have friends, neighbors, all kinds of people. It just depends on who you're willing to open up to and to like kind of bridge that relationship, right? Because it takes being vulnerable and putting yourself out there in a different way. I think parenthood is a very specific level of like vulnerability and exhaustion and work. And then, you know, there's other areas that we can do that and that are also rewarding. And I think that that's probably going to have to be my story too, because I don't have a whole I just know after having the one that my capacity is just not very big. It's not as big as I thought it would be. I thought I was just meant to be a mom, and not that I'm not, you know, like, and not that I don't enjoy motherhood. I do. A lot of aspects of it are just amazing and incredible, but like there's a lot of it too that just really shocked me and made me realize that, you know, like maybe that's not the be all end all of my life, and there's other components and identities of me too that are important. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and that's different for every woman, right? And every family, every person. So it's very unique to your specific experience and what you go through. But I think because we've had somewhat similar experiences, then we have a kind of a similar perspective on that. But
Sure.
yeah. I think we kind of already had you explain a little bit of what you would do differently, you know, with baby number 2, now that you've gone through that. But is there anything else that you want to share about any aspect of motherhood and, you know, how far you've come?
Yeah. Callie, I think, I think that another side of postpartum is, and I feel like you mentioned a little bit with bouncing back and the pressure to bounce back, and just kind of weaving in my own health journey, of just, I struggled with a really, really bad hormone imbalance, and it took years to get things kind of leveled out. And I had graduated high school as like nearly 300 pounds, but was very athletic, and it didn't add up. Nobody could figure it out. But the second I go to college and see an OB in a different state, they're like, "Oh, this is what this is. We can fix this," you know. And I just felt like I felt very, that was another part of pregnancy and postpartum for me that was a struggle, was thinking like, I have lost all this weight, and what happens, like, how do I have a healthy pregnancy? How do I lose the weight after and do it in a healthy way? And I think things for me that I'm still focusing on for this next pregnancy, or this pregnancy right now and the next postpartum journey, is just, I really did not think about calorie deficit or anything like that. As you're breastfeeding and trying to nourish a baby and yourself and heal your own body, you need a lot of great nutrients. And so that's what I really focused on, was finding the most nutrient dense foods I could eat, creating an environment. I mean, outside of the sleep deprivation, you need to create an environment for health and wellness. And that is taking, I mean, my son and I would go on a walk. I'd put him in a baby carrier. We'd do our 2.5 mile walk in the morning. And that was just, you know, that was my me time. And I think it's important to carve that out for yourself. That's one thing I'm looking forward to this next time, and trying to figure out what that looks like now that I'll have a toddler in tow and not just one baby that I can contain. But also in the Midwest, it's winter. And so when our first son was born, it was the end of March and was warming up, and we could go outside fairly quickly. And I'm a little hesitant, just given the weather right now and what that's going to look like for activity levels for us. But I have planned and have, you know, made some healthy grab and go muffin options. Nothing that's garlic and onion this time, but just trying to focus on things for me that I know I'm going to need a healthy snack. I know I'm going to need to have these readily available to help me. I think rather than focusing on weight loss and bouncing back right after pregnancy, if you focus on nutrient dense food and caring for yourself in that way, breastfeeding is a great way to not only, I feel like, increase the health success of your baby, but also helps you balance hormones and lose weight on your own as well. Just because breastfeeding burns 300 or 500 calories a day. And I think being mindful of that is important too. Because during pregnancy, I reminded myself constantly with the first that people are like, oh, you're eating for two. And it's like, no, you're not. You're never at any point in your pregnancy eating for two adult-sized humans. You're eating for one person, and at max at the end of pregnancy, maybe an additional 500 calories. So keeping that in mind too, of just trying to create a healthy environment, and don't set yourself up to fail in postpartum, or fail or feel like you're failing because you didn't bounce back right away. That's not really what it's about. And I struggle with giving myself grace and taking a step back and really just trying to let my body be and adjust, because it just went through a whirlwind. It took 9 months to get your baby grown and healthy here, and it will take at least 9 months to get your body back, if not longer, and so I think just the one thing I'm really trying to prepare myself for is that postpartum struggle with weight loss and fitness level, and not being overly hard on myself for that idea of bouncing back. Because I think when we see women that do bounce back, I'm sure, I know of one woman right now that had a baby in September, and she's doing fabulous, and nursing and working out, and she's doing amazing. But I don't think she's the norm for that. When we see a lot of celebrities that do that, they have night nannies. They have a whole team of people coming in to help them. And it's not just them caring for their baby, nursing them. Their baby might be on formula. They might, they have specific trainers. And so I think just realizing our circumstances and where we're at and how our life varies from the lives of people we see, and just giving yourself grace in those moments is important. And I just try to remind myself of that a lot, given my own struggles with weight and insecurity in that. One of my biggest fears getting pregnant was, will I be able to lose the weight? And with our first, I did. I know I didn't get back to like the smallest size I've ever been postpartum, but that wasn't my goal. I think being healthy and finding that equilibrium is more important than trying to be the smallest you possible. So I think I definitely wanted to touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I don't think I could have said it better myself as a postpartum dietitian and coach who literally helps women like come to this, realization of the importance of those things that you just touched on, which is nutrition and rest and, prioritizing care for yourself and your body image and, a realistic expectation of what your body just went through, all of the physical and hormonal and emotional changes that you're going through, and how that takes time to all even out again. And there's the comparison game is so dangerous, and it's so easy to fall into because we are exposed to, in my opinion, way too much information on a constant basis with things like social media, which has a bunch of pros to it, but there are a lot of cons, and some of those are just like an overload of highlight reels that we see of other people seemingly having it all together, bouncing right back to their pre-baby body and, with a smile on their face and their hair done. And it's like, well, why don't I look like that? Or why, how come I don't have, my life together like that? Yeah. And I think to your point, it's, we have to be careful what we compare ourselves to. Everybody's different, and it is not the norm to kind of just return to that so quickly. And the reality is that actually, we shouldn't have the expectation to return back to what we were before baby, because we're not that person anymore. Like on every level, right? We're completely and permanently changed. So I think that kind of just ditching that whole expectation is going to be really useful to moms, because it's just not realistic. You're never going to be the same person. You're completely new. Even on a genetic level, you have pieces of your baby's DNA permanently in your body. So, and again, this could be a whole nother podcast of how we change permanently as moms. But it's so beautiful, and it's so easy to do that and to compare and to then feel badly about yourself and wonder why, you don't have what whoever else, you're comparing yourself to has. But I love that, and you just are so wise about that. So good for you with that perspective.
I really appreciate your Instagram account. Honestly, like I love seeing what your suggestions are for cooking and meals and nourishing yourself, and also just it's another, you know, kind of plug for just giving yourself grace and also nourishing your body well. And that, like, it's been a beautiful reminder for me as I prepare for postpartum, as I am in the final weeks of pregnancy right now, and just seeing that from your perspective as a professional has been beautiful for me, and I greatly appreciate the content you put out. I think in the same way of like bouncing back to, like, I feel like I don't want to scare anybody, but I also feel like it's really important to share this part of my story. Just that the woman I was speaking of that has, like, she's bounced back. I mean, she has earned it. She is working out and doing everything, and she's eating well. She knows what she's doing, you know, not that we don't, but she hasn't happened to this by chance. You know, this is intentional effort on her part. So I don't ever want to belittle that. But she talked about in a post recently how she feels she's starting to feel normal, and it's like 9 weeks postpartum. And that was like kind of a sucker punch for me, because I did not feel normal. And I can honestly say I didn't feel normal until after my son's second birthday earlier this year in March. I was talking with my husband, and I don't think he understood it at all. And I just said, I finally feel like myself again. And it wasn't because I had these hormonal highs and lows for 2 years, but it was just, you feel out of body for so long, I think. At least I did, because your body has changed a lot, and it takes a while to adjust. And just kind of a tidbit in how my brain works of working with other professionals in the past and thinking about excess skin on your body when you've lost weight. A doctor once told me that it takes 5 years for your body to stop over generating for the size you were, to then accommodate and get back to, like, to then properly generate for the size you are now, because it was something I was dealing with. And it was just kind of trying to encourage me at that point to just be patient and give your body time to adjust. And I think given that, like, 2 years postpartum is a lot of time, but it's not saying that it took my body 2 years to adjust with that adjustment per se. But you know, your body is different, your life is different. And it's probably, I mean, for me, it probably took a long time, because I'm very, as I mentioned, very type A, but I like order. And it's hard to have order with a newborn and a toddler. And they're constantly learning and evolving, as are you. And so I think it took me 2 years to feel comfortable with the rate of evolution happening in our home and in myself. And so, again, I don't want to scare anybody who's thinking about being a mom or who's a new mom right now. And I hope, if anything, it gives moms a breath of fresh air, or just a feeling that they resonate with, that, oh, it did take me a long time, and that's okay. Like, I just, I don't know. I felt kind of, like I said, I felt sucker punched hearing that she felt normal after 9 weeks. And it took me 2 years to feel normal, which 2 years is also normal. Like, it can take 2 years to feel that way. So I think
Yeah.
that's another important tidbit that I just feel is really necessary to highlight, that it's okay if it takes a while to feel like yourself again. It took me a long time.
It's okay if it takes more than 2 years.
Absolutely.
I'm seeing research now that says it can take, 7+ years for you to return to normal, whatever that even
That is,
really
yeah.
means, So it's like, and it's just so unique. And 9 weeks, that's insanely fast. I mean, that's a newborn still. And so, I would love to, she's blessed because she must have a lot of support and
Yeah.
just mentally feeling really good to have the motivation to be disciplined and keep up with that
Yes.
stuff, and have somebody obviously caring for her baby while she's able to put the time and effort into doing the things that it takes to be able to even do that, and to to work out and to do all those things.
Absolutely.
So that's amazing for her, but that's not everybody's story like yours and mine. I was the same as you. I just recently, literally a couple of months just started feeling like myself again. You know,
Mm.
a new me, but
Yeah.
more like, okay, I kind of have, you know, a similar feeling when I wake up in the morning, and it's not this like dooming anxiety and like all, you know, I can finally feel
Yeah.
like I found a flow. And so, yeah, it's okay if it takes years. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
want, yeah, like you said, anyone to think that there's something wrong with them. That actually
Right.
is completely normal.
Yeah.
It's not a small thing that you're going through when
No.
you become a mom. So it takes time. And to, I am not a patient person, but you know, you you are kind of forced to become patient. And the more patient you
Yes.
can be, especially with yourself, is so helpful, because everything is a phase. And as much as it'll feel like this is never going to end and this is how I'm going to feel forever when you're stuck in a dark
Mm-hmm.
place, everything does come to an end, right, in life. Like, that's the only thing that is guaranteed, is that eventually
Yeah.
something's going to end. It's going to change.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the only truth that's always going to happen, that we're always guaranteed. And it's the same with motherhood. You know, everything is a phase. Everything eventually ends. Like you were saying, I think in the beginning of the
Mm.
podcast, just when you finally start to get a grip on one development or milestone or phase, then it changes, and you're like, dang it, I was just feeling like I had it, and now it's something different. And, you know, there's the good side of that is that, you know, if you're stuck in a place that doesn't feel good, or you're struggling, like, it will eventually come to an end and be over, and you will
Mm-hmm.
get through it, and on to the other side. I mean, it's like birth, right? It feels like it's never going to end, and it's so hard. And then you think like, I can't do this. Just when you think you're
Yeah.
like going to die or something, you know, then the baby
Is
comes.
here.
So
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
similar. Yeah.
Mm.
It's a good
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Um,
good. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Chelsea. Thank you
mm.
so much for coming on and being so open and honest and raw with my listeners. Are there any resources that you wanted to share? Anything else that you haven't mentioned,
Yes.
or even that you have mentioned that you want to talk about in more
Yeah.
detail? Yeah.
I think just mainly some resources that um, that I really have enjoyed listening to podcasts about parenting. Honestly, it's less about motherhood, kind of, but Janet Lansbury has a podcast called Unruffled Parenting, and again, she's kind of like Kara from Taking Care of Babies. She speaks with such like this beautiful tone. I feel like I'm being nurtured as a mom listening to her. And sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, she totally understands exactly the moment that I'm experiencing right now, and she's speaking to me. And so even though it's for parenting, I do feel like it like fills my motherhood soul. Um, Mama Stay Fit is a great podcast that I listen to. They do birth stories. They have programs for like C-section recovery, for like doing C-section massage on yourself to help with the scar tissue, and then other things to prepare for a natural birth. So they're great. I really love this one's kind of on the cusp. I almost didn't mention it because it's not entirely motherhood. It's like the whole gamut, but they also share birth stories and other just parenting and motherhood journeys. And it's called the Millennial Pioneers Podcast. I do a lot of listening. I feel
I
like
love it.
in like parenthood, motherhood, I don't feel like I have the luxury to sit down and read a book. But
Right.
when we're taking a walk, I can pop in a headphone, just one, I can pop in one and listen to a podcast while we're on a walk. So, and golly, also how I found you was, I would say our mutual friend Krista has a podcast called the Conversations on Wellbeing. And that really was I think Krista shared her birth story maybe on her podcast or maybe I just listened to it with you and when she did it with you, but her stories about motherhood and that journey, but also grace and just patience with yourself. And again, Krista's voice is one of those like just soothing sounds and has really
Mm-hmm.
reached me in moments of desperation. And I can say even when was going on a walk probably last spring, I felt this pressure to in my head like I need to slow down. It was this twofold thing of my inner voice is telling me constantly, work harder, do more, be better. But then the flip side is knowing I am taxed to the nth degree. I need to create space and slow it down and create an environment of just peace for myself. And I took a walk with intentional thought of going slow. And I wasn't trying to, have a fast pace. I wasn't trying to speed up. But as I was rounding a corner, I could feel my inner self being like, oh, you need to pick up the pace. This is a brisk walk. Walking should leave you a little bit breathless when you're walking at an appropriate pace. But Krista's voice came out literally, and just a random podcast I was listening to of hers was like, some people might feel the necessity to increase their pace right now. Like, it was just kind of very like interesting moment of like clash of two things that weren't supposed to be together. And I was like, thank you, Krista, for talking me off my ledge right now so I can go back to my very leisure, life-giving, peace-creating walk for myself. And so I can't say enough about Krista's podcast too. But a lot of those are resources that I have found that either help with, preparing for birth, preparing for postpartum, walking through that journey, finding help where you need it. But they're some of my favorites. So.
Yeah, those all sound great. I love Krista's podcast, and the others, we'll link all of them in the show notes.
Okay.
And I love that little synchronicity that you shared. I find that those moments, because, we all have them every now and then, and I just find them to be so beautiful. And I like to think of them as a reminder that we are exactly where we should be. And I think that they're really beautiful. And I love hearing of other people share those. So I love that was something that you experienced with Krista's podcast. And yes, her voice is so soothing. And her story, she did come on this podcast, Birth of a Mama, and share. It was like one of my favorite episodes because the whole time, similar to you, I was just having these like, oh my God moments of how similar our experiences was and how much her perspective was just like mine. And it makes me wonder how many other women out there, have struggled in that same way. And I bet you there's so many. So hope that we can reach all the mamas out there so that they know that they're not alone, and what they're going through is probably totally normal, even though it can feel really hard and really isolating. With that, where can listeners find you if they want to reach out, if you are open to being reached?
Absolutely. I feel like Instagram's probably the best place to start to find me. I would say either account. I have a personal or a business account. Either one's fine, whichever you find first. But my Instagram handle personally is Chelsea Morris Day in the Life. I used to be very good about posting little pictures of kind of daily life with my infant, now toddler, and I have just resolved to stories with him. So, but then my business account is Chelsea Mitchell Photo. So, either one of those are great places to find me. And I have similar Facebook names. So if you are on Facebook more than Instagram, that's fine. But yeah, I think those are great places to start. So.
Awesome. Well, I will also link those in the show notes. If anyone has any questions or they want to reach out to you, they can do so. And yeah, just thank you so much for coming on. This, again, was just such a good conversation. I might reach out to you if you would be interested to come back on and dive deeper into one, specific topic. But yeah, this has been so good. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I feel probably like most of your guests too, that our stories are all just, it's so hard to have a brief synopsis of all these experiences, and I'd be happy to dive into more, any specific topic later. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at the.moms.nutritionist and subscribe to this channel to be notified of each new episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast even further, please like this video and share it with a friend or anyone who could benefit from watching. This helps get the word out there, which helps moms heal and thrive.